Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined this afternoon by Carsen Williams, graduate assistant at Brigham Young University, BYU men's basketball program. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Coach. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So let's dive in. And we just talked offline a little bit about your background and what that was like. But if you could give the audience a synopsis, kind of take us through the journey. How did you end up in the seat you're in now? And what has that been like throughout your way?
Yeah, of course. So I'm from Utah, kind of born and raised there. Played on a great high school basketball team, had a great time. Didn't plan initially to play college basketball. I served a 2-year LDS mission. And then came back and was just going to school at BYU at the time, without doing any coaching or playing or anything. And then kind of some things aligned, and I ended up, getting in contact with Coach Vasher and Coach Terry at Hartnell. And so, ended up going to play out there. Had a great experience, learned a lot from them and just really enjoyed, playing again. Had an unfortunate situation where I took a charge and broke my hand early in the year. So I missed a good chunk of the season. That was really frustrating for me, and hard to kind of come to grips with, but it was really ended up being a blessing in disguise where, it was kind of my first glimpse into coaching. People had always told me as a player that, like I was going to be a coach or that I played like a coach, and I never really got it. But being on that side of it and, working with them, and they were very gracious to let me be involved with some of our scouting and game prep and things like that. And so I just looked at the game a little bit differently, and just really enjoyed it. So after, my year there, I went back to BYU, just going to school, reached out to my former high school coach, Nate Carling, who was coaching at Westlake High School in Utah at the time, and just wanted to help out. My plan wasn't to go into coaching at all. It was just, it seemed like something fun to do while I was going to school and, kill some time, be around the game still. And it didn't take long for me to realize that, that's what I wanted to do with my life. Just being around, our kids there. The culture that Coach Carling had built was just really enjoyable for me. And it just felt like, a match made in heaven. I just loved it. So, fast forward a little bit, I spent 4 years coaching high school. I was, spent a couple of years there as a JV coach, one of our varsity assistants as well. Took on a lot more responsibilities with our scouting and skill development, things like that. So, and we had a couple great teams. So, we were the number 1 seed in Utah, played for a state championship, had our best player that year, who was, a D1 caliber player, tears ACL that we played without for a while, and still made it that far. Went to the state semifinals the following year. And so, had a lot of success there, and I absolutely loved it, have so many close relationships there. And at the same time, though, I wanted to see what the other side was like, right? I'd played junior college basketball, I'd coached for a while, and as a competitor, you just, you want to climb that ladder. And so I wanted to see, what that D1 side looked like if I would want to pursue that. And so, I reached out to some contacts at BYU that I had, and actually I reached out and, had a conversation with our ops, Bobby Hordesky. He doesn't even remember this, but we had a conversation where I was trying to get on as a GA, and I think it felt like it was more of a courtesy at the time where he talked to me, and they had a former player coming in to fill the open role, and there wasn't really any opportunity at the time, so I kind of just forgot about it. Was just focused on coaching high school, working with the high school I was at to try to get a teaching job and try to get a head coaching job at high school, kind of work those ranks. And then about a year later, a buddy of mine who was finishing up as a GA, Brad Kitchen, reached out to me, to see if I was interested. They had some spots opening up. So kind of went through that process, met with, Coach Mark Pope a couple times. It was a whirlwind trying to apply to a master's program and, had to get admitted to that in order to be a GA. So I had like 2 weeks to, submit this application, study for the GRE for like 3 days, take that. It was a doozy, but, luckily was able to, get accepted to that, which was, a big box to check. And then, Coach Pope offered me a spot. And I took it, it was mid-May of last year. So just about a year ago, kind of got thrown into that. And I've been there, just about a year now. So yeah, so that's kind of, what I've been through so far.
Perfect. That's a great place to set us up. So I have a couple of threads I want to pull on, and I want to start with your mission. And I had a guy on a couple months ago that had gone to the Peace Corps for a while, and I had asked him how that had impacted his journey as a coach and as an athlete, right? In your case, you went back and played after the fact. But can you talk a little bit about the way in which your experience on the mission has shaped your approach to life and coaching?
Yeah, great question. I think, first and foremost, while it was really molded my life and set a, jumpstart for everything I did, it was really hard too, right? So it was early mornings and, out working all day trying to, teach people about Christ. But, what people weren't always receptive to that, right? So long days and, days where it was hard to have that discipline to just keep going and doing what you needed to do. It would have been easier to go home earlier or to, just go hang out with, a family that was in the church out instead of, trying to go visit somebody or find new people that, would be open to the message. And I think that's super applicable where, there's days that are hard, right? Where, we do 2-a-days in September and, you're up at, I'm up at 4:45 every day for, almost a month. And those times where, it's hard, right? But why you do it. And, one of the Coach Pope's big things is to get better every day. So we talk about that a lot. And just, having that motivation and discipline to keep doing the things that are going to pay off, even when it's hard to do so. So that's one big part of it for me. And I would also say it just kind of puts everything in perspective as well, right? I mean, obviously, you got to be a little bit crazy to go into coaching. It's a lot of people have told me that, and I'm sure you've heard that as well. And it's something where, you've got to be passionate about it, but at the same time, it's not everything, right? Where it's, I think having that, the religious foundation of my life allows me to have something to fall back on, when you're going through those hard times or you're in that losing streak or things are hard, right? You can go home or, one of the great things about BYU is we never have meetings on Sundays. And so, as a staff, I'm there, Monday through Saturday, 12, 14 hours a day, sometimes longer. But Sundays is just something I really came to appreciate because I would be able to go to church and kind of have that disconnect where I could just, not think about basketball for a couple hours and to, take care of that spiritual side of my life, which was super refreshing and also just allowed me to kind of put things in perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm always curious when you take, essentially in your case and in the Peace Corps example, 2 years off from your routine to go and serve and how the takeaways from that impact what you do moving forward. So thanks for sharing that. Okay. Secondly, you broke your hand taking a charge, which basketball coaches will tell you is the greatest play in basketball. So I appreciate that about you. Just wanted to
I was a charge guy, that was my thing.
There you go. Well, I'm big on that. The team is big on that. We have a championship belt that we give out when guys take charges. So some people don't like them. I do, but we'll leave that. Going from JV high school coach and varsity assistant to college, what are the things that you can point to that are the biggest differences, so to speak, that you have observed and noticed?
Biggest differences that I have noticed, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no doubt. Just think, right. So if you circle back, right, I'm coaching JV basketball, that's your primary deal. You're also helping with the varsity guys, and then it's like, okay, I'm coming in as a GA. I have no idea. We'll talk about this, what your responsibilities are right now, a year into essentially a Power 5 level, right program. So like, what are the major differences, right? As people think about, I want to be at this level, I want to be at this level, like talk us through that.
Yeah, man, so much. Time in the gym is a big one. At the high school level, we had, in summer we got kids in the gym, or after practice, I might work with a kid for, 20 minutes doing something. But I mean, one, there's so much to do. We'll probably talk about this as well. I'm at my desk, all day, and especially when we're in the off season, guys come in for developmental stuff. And so, I'm on the court all the time where, our guys have 24 access to our gym. And so, I think the skill development is something that's drastically different where we spend so much time there. Workouts with one of our assistant coaches and a player and a GA and a manager, or doing that a couple times a week. We're starting up our off-season workouts here soon, and that's going to be a huge part of it. And that's something that I'd done a little bit, but it was more just kind of shooting and maybe a little bit of what we ran offensively at the high school. But like the in depth and what we work on, and finishes, and the types of shots we do, it's all so pointed for a purpose, and just the level that we do that at is so different. Another thing I think was super different in my personal experience with scouting. So I did, at the high school level, there's some varying degrees of that. I was fortunate to work for a phenomenal head coach, but his philosophy was more along the lines of, we are going to do what we do, and if we do a good job of that, we're going to be in good shape. And so
I like that guy.
he's one of the best for a reason here in the state. And so, but at the college level, I'm paired with one of our assistant coaches. So we've got 3 GAs and 3 assistants, right? And one of us is each paired with an assistant. We help, they kind of have their specific players that they work with. So we do skill development with that coach. We do scouting with that coach, and other, things that they don't have time for or they want help with, we kind of get those responsibilities. And so when it came to scouting, that was something we did, the level of depth and detail we go to is just night and day difference. I mean, so we were in the WCC this last year. We're moving to the Big 12. But let's say we're going to play, Portland, for example, or somebody. So I'll watch the last 3-4 games that they played, and I will, label every single possession on offense. So if it's a horn set, if it's, whatever, coming off a floppy or whatever it looks like, who it's for, what type of shot they get. So, we use sports code, which is the greatest resource ever. But, going through that, like I'll have a playlist that's like 300 or 400 clips, kind of broken down all their sets, what the player is, who's doing what, that type of stuff. So the level of detail there, it took me a while to kind of figure it out. And, I would go back to the assistant and show it to him, Coach Fieger, who I work with, and be like, okay, can you do this, right? So kind of, I got to the point where, it was much more, I kind of figured it out after a while, but it took me a minute to realize, just how much detail we needed on all these things. And obviously you kind of narrow that down a lot once it gets to the players. But just how wide of a base we set to understand our opponent was, something that was really eye-opening for me.
Love it. So philosophically, now that you're a year in and eye-opening and you're learning all this new stuff, I mentioned that I like your high school coach, because in my age and 25 years in and coaching high school and the time we have or don't, and how to kind of thread the needle of being as efficient as you can, I'm with him. It's like, this is what we're going to do, and I'm not scouting, and you guys can adjust. So what would you say if you went back to work with him at that level? How much do you think all of this data analysis really moves the needle in regards to where you put your time and energy? And I ask that simply because you know the difference in the landscape, right? You said you're at your desk all
Right.
day. You got time to do these things. And the high school coach, you don't. You're teaching, your kids are in class, you got to get in the gym and do X, Y, and Z. Where would you put your time and energy, knowing that's your only non-renewable resource, if you had to craft, right, like the perfect model for kind of high school and doing it at that level?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of, one more thing I just thought of that'll help me answer this question that I didn't mention in the last one, where I think our staff at BYU, I think is one of the more analytically driven staffs in the country, would be my guess.
Yeah, you got 7 analytical coaches on your website.
Yeah. So, we do a lot. And our coaches do a great job of that, where synergy we look at religiously, and that's something that I've really learned the ins and outs of. But I think obviously the resources are different, but I think the idea of it is very applicable, where essentially the whole point of it is put kids in position, or put players in a position where they're really going to succeed, where they're most effective, right? So like if your points per possession is a 1.1, on spot ups, or as a pick and roll ball handler or whatever, as a cutter, like, hey, you should do these things more. Like, this is only, let's say when the kid's a cutter, he's got, 1.2 points per possession, which is crazy high. But if you only do that like 8% of the time, let's increase how often you do that, to make you a more effective player and help our offense, because you're getting better looks, and the shots that you're taking are, a lot higher percentage than, maybe whatever, mid-range or whatever, that other shot might be. And so I think, there's a marriage you can find there at the high school level, where, the resources are a little bit different, but I think being able to recognize, where your kids excel, and I think kind of tailoring, your offense or where they're going to get those looks to just, help your effectiveness as an offense as a whole. I think that's a way where it's not super complicated to make that happen, but it could also be super effective.
Yeah, no doubt. And what I really like about what you said is the focus on your athletes, right? Because what I've found is every time I try to prepare, so to speak, our guys for what's coming, we lay an egg. So I just stopped doing that and focus on, what are the analytics telling us about our kids and how can we enhance what you just said, where they're best at, and utilize those tools versus doing these long, elaborate game plans for the other team, which at the high school level, the retention isn't always there.
Right.
So what do you do for 14 hours a day sitting at your desk as a GA?
I get asked that question so often and I never know how to answer it. It really, it varies on a day-to-day basis. So, during the season, we practice at 2:00 every day. So, I'm in grad school myself as well. So, I might have class for an hour or two, and, I get there between 8 and 9. I might have class for an hour or two in the morning. And then, from there, it could be, sometimes, taking this player needs this taken care of. So, helping him do that. Or, sometimes guys have a personal workout in the morning, they've got 10 minutes to get, showered, and they make a 20-minute walk around across campus to get to class. So, guys get ready, jump in the golf cart, take guys to class, things like that. And then probably around 1:00, we start doing practice prep stuff. So, as a staff, we talk about our practice plan in the morning. That's, done in our staff meeting. Kind of one of my responsibilities is, printing those off. We've got specific kind of metrics for our guys that we put on the back of it. So I print those, give them to all of our coaches before we head out. I'll be down on the court 20, 30 minutes before practice, helping guys get shots up or making sure our managers know what's happening that day, kind of running through it. If there's anything different, prepping them for that. We'll practice for, hour and a half, 2 hours. And a lot of times there's shots after that. And then, one of our responsibilities as GAs as well is our post-practice meals. So I've usually, the day before or a couple of days before, I've worked with, I've talked to this gym of a restaurant, or I've ordered online this, and then they're calling me to make sure that's coming. So I hand my phone off to one of our managers. They set that up. I make sure we're good there. And then by the time we're done eating, guys are getting extra shots up. It's probably, 5, 6 o'clock at that point. And a lot of times, during the season, at that point, it was when I could finally get some of the scouting stuff done I needed to. So then I'm watching games, or I'm, putting together, if we've already done the basic stuff in it, then I'm putting together the sorters or the playlists of what film we're going to show if I've got a scout coming up. Yeah. So, what's the identity of this team? It's a transition team, it's a steals team, it's an offensive rebounding team. I'm going to get 5 clips of each, put those in a sorter. We're going to show those in 3 days for our first day of game prep for, whoever it is. So I probably, it's a couple hours of that. I always joke that my entire master's I complete between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. So might squeeze in a little bit of that at some point. And I mean, during the season, I'd probably go home on average, probably between 8 and 9 most days. So,
No doubt. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Let me pivot here. So you work for a very successful high school coach. You're working for a guy at BYU that's been really successful. What are the best things each of those programs do that have the greatest impact on whatever culture you're trying to create, right? So like if you were to tomorrow get to start your own program, what are you taking from each of those programs that you're going to make sure you do regardless, even as you try to find your own voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, at the high school level, culture is just such a big thing because, like you said, you don't have a ton of time with those guys. And so I think the consistency on what you build is huge. We've got kind of a motion offense that we ran at the high school that's a little bit different. John Beeline used to run back in the day. A lot of people call it 2-guard, that we've done, for a long time. And our kids do that in junior high, and then they do it, in high school. And it's funny, a couple of years ago, the year we made the championship run, we hadn't really run it at all, that season. And then, in our semifinal matchup going against, really, really good program, an all-state center, a kid that's at Michigan State now playing, got some minutes as a true freshman. But, they had beat us pretty good a couple weeks before. We didn't know what to do. and we ran something we literally hadn't run all year because these kids had spent 5 years running it, and it really, allowed us to do things we hadn't done before. And so I think knowing who you are, knowing what your principles are, and one of the things that's a little bit unique that Coach Carling does at the high school level is, we force everything middle. So we don't give up baseline, which is very different than what most people do at this point in time. So, kind of heavy gaps, kind of the Tony Bennett pack line idea, but just, really emphasizing the stunts one pass away. And so, things like that, just, I think you can only have so many things that you really just harp on and that are your identity offensively and defensively, but just knowing what those are and knowing, like where you're really going to hang your hat on, I think is super important. And so those are, small examples. And I think, in the time that I've spent with Coach Pope, it's really just a lot of things that I knew, but I didn't know how to kind of quantify or like put into words what it is. And he just really defines it. He's such a, really just high IQ guy in basketball and just in general, one of the smartest people I've ever been around. And so one thing Coach Pope always says is like, I hate synonyms. We're going to have like one word for this. We're going to have one word for that. Like, and so, you can say something 4 different ways. And people do that, all throughout the game, but being consistent in your messaging, saying it this, like, even, what's an example I can think of with this? Like, for example, last summer, we were really emphasizing our transition, and you hear the terms, rim runner, and wing runner, whatever, all the time, but we changed that to rim sprinter, wing sprinter, because he just really wanted to emphasize getting out. And no one ever said rim runner because we were saying it this way, and that was our point of emphasis. Yeah. And so that's, one small example with that. But yeah, and then, we've got kind of this culture wall, that's, a couple of our acronyms that are our main kind of who we are. And there's all sorts of phrases on there as well that kind of just make up that identity. And so I mentioned one earlier, which is, GBED, get better every day. Coach Pope talks about that incessantly. Every single day it's, did we get better today? What am I doing? Like, just focusing on that 1%, right? And people say that, and like, you hear that as, coach speak, but how often he says that, like, it really is a part of who he is, and it's a part of his program, because that's just, it's come out, where he talks about it so much, and it's such a point of emphasis that it becomes real rather than just a talking point.
So you mentioned,
I would say that's a couple things.
You mentioned a culture wall. How does that stuff, whatever's on there, because I haven't seen it obviously, get lived out? How do you take it off the wall and make it come alive in your program? Talk a little bit about how that happens at BYU.
Yeah. I think a lot of it just depends, what you emphasize as a coach. And if you stay true to what, if you say it when it's easy, do you still say it when it's hard? Or if your starter does this thing, is he treated the same way as somebody else? And so, a couple of the main things we talk about here, I wonder if I have a picture of it, or I can just kind of have a better idea what I'm talking about to you. But
well, go ahead and look for it. Go ahead and look for it. I'm going to see while you look for it. Ready? Go.
Okay. So yeah, with our word wall, there's a couple main things on there. So one thing, get better every day, which I've talked about. Another big thing is BLRA, which is best locker room in America. And so, Coach Pope talks about that a lot, where, our guys sticking together, caring for each other, and just really, creating that bond in our locker room that's going to set us apart from everybody else. And I think that's done, one of the ways he talks about that is, doing hard things together. It's like the 2-a-days that I mentioned, or, just watching film or things like that, just putting in the work and be able to do things together that, other people aren't willing to do, and the bond that comes from that. And so I think that's part of it. Be relentless is a big thing as well that we talk about. So, just, I think, and that's, you talk about how that happens. A lot of these things that are on here, like, when I think about it, it's who Coach Pope is. Like, I think, he spent a decade in the NBA. He always says that he was the worst player in the NBA. I don't think anybody believes him. But, he is, he's a big guy. He's, 6'9", 6'10". But he's just, I think his whole life, he is prided himself on outworking people and finding ways to success through that. And so that's what he's built our program on. And so, that's who he is. And I think that's bled into our program. And then just, little things that are in our offense. So, we've got, our transition to, or our principles of transition defense, or, pace, space, extra pass is something we talk about a lot. So, if you drive in the lane, race to space is something that we say all the time, where, to create that spacing for a second drive and also to get that next catch and shoot. So, things like that. What else is on here?
That's a good sample size. I want to pivot to
right.
access you have at, again, a place like BYU that's moving to the Big 12. It's, a well-known program pretty much in all the sports. What have you learned, if anything, if you even have time to wander around and watch other disciplines practice or engage with other players while you're there? Like what have you learned watching other programs that you've been able to put in your Rolodex for future use?
Are you talking about at BYU or talking about like programs that we've played against?
I'm talking about at BYU, say the softball team or the football team, or hell, at Westlake when you were there. I'm always curious about the crossover. A lot of people think, hey, I only got to study basketball, but one of my soapboxes is like, look, you can learn from anything going on around you if your eyes are open.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't cross paths a lot with, different programs. Obviously, I kind of keep tabs on a little bit, with football in particular or other sports, you run into here and there. And I think, like our football team in particular is one that, they've had quite a bit of success, had some good teams, top 25, high draft picks. And I do think, BYU it's a little bit different than most places, right? It kind of I think a lot of people that don't know anything about it or kind of have there's a kind of this mystery around it. What are those Mormons like, right? Or what really happens over there? But I think there's a family aspect to it, where just, that's built in the program as well, right? Where there's, that's obviously at a faith-based institution. That's a big part of, just the culture overall of BYU, but I think that's bled into a lot of these sports where, just creating those tight-knit bonds and having that be something that's emphasized, in your family, quote unquote, just of your, of your team or of your program, and having people that, really care. And I think that's something that, like our football team appears to have done a good job of as well. Kalani Sitake, who's the head coach there, is, something that he talks about all the time. The guys that I know that have been in that program, it's something that's, super emphasized as well. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I would say that's one of the main ways that I've seen it.
Great. Awesome. Appreciate that. All right. I got one more question here. What have you most recently changed your mind on? So I used to be over here and now I'm over here, and here's why. And it could be basketball related. It could be life. It doesn't really matter. It's just growth mindset. Like, what are the ways in which we constantly reevaluate our positions and stances on things?
It's a good question. What have I changed my mind on most recently? Let's see. The one thing that I'd kind of mentioned is, the way defensively that we run, at the high school it was kind of a little bit unique that we had done, where, just kind of having things in those gaps and being available there. But now it's, kind of keeping things to the sideline and not letting teams get side to side, icing ball screens, things like that. That's something where, when I was initially exposed to it, because I spent 4 years teaching kids and being so ingrained on this one mindset, which was, unique in its aspect. But I think seeing that differently now, and I think for me personally, I was like, okay, this is how we do it, but like, I'm not sure if this is what I want to do long term, right? And I think I've come to the point, one of the ways that we break down for each game that we play, we look at our points per possession on, when you touch one side of the floor, two sides of the floor, three sides of the floor. And obviously, like, if you look at points per possession, when you do that, it goes up and up and up. And so I think, that's one thing that I've kind of, through kind of analytically seeing those numbers and through just being around it more, like, that's just a basketball example, but that's one thing where, if you can keep things on one side of the floor and not let, them get side to side or stay out of rotation, it's super effective. And it's something that's, really common in high school, college basketball, in the NBA at this point. Or, like icing ball screens I'd never really done before. But we do that quite a bit as well. And so just things like that, where you're exposed to it, you're unsure. And then once you kind of see the results or see how effective it can be, I've really come to embrace that more in my own personal philosophy.
No, I love that. Thank you. That's a great example, actually. And I would imagine if I was to not have the stats in front of me, which I don't, speculating, you get it changed 3 times, you're probably scoring at a higher points per possession than if it's only one time, which is the whole point of let's keep the ball on one side.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks for being here today. I got to run out to softball, but I appreciate you taking the time to jump on.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it.